This is John with Excellis Technology, and I have Dan Mayer with me. I'm a software consultant, and Dan is our senior developer. We're going to go through the what, why, and how data conversions, and I promise I won't be reading every slide back to back with you. The origin of this presentation came from some questions about the Amicus and Abacus merger. So we wanted to go through, and we've been getting a lot of conversion questions on that and a lot of projects on it. So we wanted to go through and share some of that information to answer any questions or concerns clients or their consultants may have on the topic. A little bit about Excellis real quick here. Excellis is an IT provider. We do managed IT, application development, software consulting, remote support, and security and compliance. We work with a myriad of products to support law firms in every aspect, whether it's the software that makes the firm run, the hardware they need to install it, or just answering questions on computers about how do I check my email when I'm out of the office. We support firms in all those areas. So today we're going to look at, discuss some of the changes in the practice management realm focused on the Amicus and Abacus merger, and like I said, we've been moving a lot of these clients to Clio. It's been a great solution for them. We wanted to go over some of that. We're going to talk about the end of life of some of the practice management software, the mergers and acquisitions, and how you consult for a conversion. So if you have any questions as I go through this, feel free to drop them in the chat, and I'll be checking on that periodically to answer those questions for you. We'll also have a Q&A session at the end, and Dan's here with me. He's the one that does the direct conversions himself, so he'll be able to answer all those questions on a highly technical level or at an overview. The topics we're going to look at are what, why, and how. Basically, how you determine what information is important, why you need this information, how it's used, and how you build the scope. And that's our question and answer section at the end there. So what? Determining what matters, play on words there. You can pretend it's intended. It wasn't at first, but it is now. So what matters and what doesn't. For this section, we need to determine what matters to the firm. What we mean by that is what is important. A lot of firms will tell you that they need all their data is important all the time. But when you're doing a conversion, things aren't always clean. They can get a little messy. It's hard to map things and determine what goes where. So by identifying that important information and identifying what isn't important, you can actually narrow or expand the scope to help meet the client's budget and really prioritize those features to make sure that the software you're migrating your data to has the features and placeholders for the information that you need. For example, if you're doing pulling documents out of one practice management system into another, maybe the practice management system that held documents in the old one had a way to categorize or organize those documents that's not present in the new system. That's one of those things that you want to identify going forward. Is it important to the firm? Maybe they never used those categories for documents, maybe they didn't care, so maybe that data doesn't go over and it can be left out of the scope. Maybe that data is vital to the firm and very important. That would determine, how that data is brought over, if it's brought over to one practice management system or another. So it's very, very important to determine find all the information and determine what matters and help the firm prioritize that information so you can really define that scope and know how to focus that data conversion to fit budgets, because converting all of everything can be quite expensive and time consuming. So here's our big hint, right? Firms may not always know what they want. So, and as in my example, firms say all their data is important, but as you go through and you prioritize the information, and that's the value we provide as consultants, we help them really identify what data is important, looking at their workflows, looking at what fields are used in a contact record and which fields aren't used, so that we can really identify that information, help the firm understand that not all of their information is important. So why do we want to identify this information? The obvious is something like contact records. Why are we identifying what's important? We need to get the firm's contacts over there. That's very important. The less obvious are like the document categories in my example. That might be something that as a consultant you don't think of up front, or as a firm you don't think of up front. So by identifying that information, again, we're helping the firm prioritize and target that information that's going to be converted. So when you're doing this and determining why, be curious, ask a lot of questions, and do provide some pushback. If their answer is one of those, redundant, we need it because we need it, you need to determine why. They may be right. They may need that data, and they may not have a good reason for it. In which case, that's a good indicator that you should talk to someone else at the firm. Maybe it's, the paralegal that's actually entering the information and not the office manager. Or maybe it's the partner that developed the workflow that's being distributed, right? So we need to be curious, ask a lot of questions, and again, we really want to prioritize that data. That's very, very important when you're building the scope and determining how the information is going to go up and in what order. So the ugly truth of it is no matter how good you are at data conversions, parts of them will be messy. We're essentially mapping a field in one place that's client ID to another field that may be called client number, client identifier, ID number, or maybe something totally unrelated. So data conversions are messy. We want to set the expectation with the client and whenever possible, map out as much as you can up front, whether that's in an Excel spreadsheet or some picture, so that they know what fields are going where. And when you're mapping this out, use 2 or 3 examples of their data. Ask them for a client they're familiar with, and really build that information out. If you can get a copy of that database and run a test beforehand and upload part of that information, that's always very helpful. They need to know that even though they're prioritizing this information, not all of it may go over, and what does go over, where it's going to go and how it's going to end up and what it's going to look like. Oftentimes Dan will run a conversion, get the data up there, and then let the client look at it in the new environment. So if we're taking data out of Amicus and uploading it to Clio, he'll do that in their Clio environment, which no one's using yet. It's not live, right? And they'll go and look around and say, okay, this is the bank that we service on a regular basis. We see that here's their contact records, here's the company's contact information, here's where all the matter information is, here's how the records are related, so that they really get a solid idea, and then definitely get them to sign off on it if you're a consultant. You want to make sure that they're not going to go and change later. We encountered a tricky situation with a firm where we worked with their office manager. We did the whole data conversion. She signed off on it. And I think it was almost literally the day they went live with the new information, she resigned from the firm and walked out the door. And unbeknownst to us, her communication with the firm was rather poor. So we had to go back and redo some of it. So data conversions are messy. Make sure that's communicated and make sure you keep everyone in the loop. But if you're managing these expectations and mapping it out, they're really not that bad. So how? This is the other part of determining scope. When you're determining what information is important, you need to determine how they're using the information. So understand their workflow, how they do client intake, how that's going to transfer from their old practice management system to the new one. Which is also part of the consulting process, and many of the consultants listening, I'm sure, are familiar with this. But understanding how that workflow will change in the new system, and this may be an opportunity to address or change roles within the firm as needed. But if we stay focused on the data conversion, we want to know how that data is going to be exported from one system to another, how it will be imported, what that time frame is going to look like, and that usage comparison that I was kind of talking about in the previous slide, where they can go in, they can look around, maybe they can see information and how it's going to be mapped, so they know how it's going to work and can practice some of those complex workflows. A great example of this are task lists. if we're converting a task list or an amicus precedent to a task list, not only do we want to make sure all the fields are right, but that it's still going to work in the same system, in the new system. For example, in Clio, it's going to work the same way that it would in amicus. Or if there is a difference in the way those are signed or delegated, the firm knows about this beforehand, because during this data conversion process, even being a consultant, a great deal of it can be, the back end can be a mystery to me, and Dan knows all of it. So as you're going through this whole process, we need to know how that data is getting there and how it's going to work, because the way a task list triggers in Clio might be slightly different than how that precedent is triggered in amicus, and the client needs to be aware of that, or it may appear that something's wrong with the data conversion. So part of the data conversion, and an important part, is being aware of the differences in the system and how they work. So back to my example that kind of led us to a disaster, where that office manager walked out the door. Make sure your point person, the decision maker, make sure that they know how these systems work and they aren't arbitrarily choosing important information. As part of that sticky situation we encountered, the person making the decision in the office manager, we were asking her on a regular basis that she was communicating with the partners. We were getting signatures, and it seems like she was just saying to them, sign here, and then emailing it back to us, because they weren't aware of half the decisions that were made, despite our best efforts. So, even being really good at this and going through it a lot, we still encounter some fun situations, and I'm sure it happens to all of you from time to time. So do get feedback from the entire firm. SurveyMonkey is a great way to ask some questions about important data. You can use Google Sheets, or not Sheets, Google Forms as a free one to get some other important survey information and really help determining and prioritizing that information. So once you have all your information prioritized, you want to build that scope. You want to know how long it's going to take you to build each item, where it's going to go, map that data, make sure that the client understands as you do where it's going to go. Run some samples if you can. And as you prioritize that data, right, if you can narrow it down to maybe 15 important data points or records that are going over versus 100, the scope can be reduced and affordable. And actually, you might not lose data. When you're reducing that scope, not only do you end up with a more affordable, cost-effective project, but you get the opportunity to clear out a lot of that junk record, those junk records that you don't use, or maybe legacy information that you don't need, assuming you're in a situation where that's beneficial to you. Depends on the area of practice and the firm, of course, but it is an opportunity to really clean up your data and make great improvements. So as you're finalizing that scope, work with the client, make sure that the information is listed, make sure that that prioritized data is in that scope. At this point, I want to open it up to questions and answers. Give me just a minute to unmute the mics. And Dan and I are both here to answer questions. This will be, depending on the technicalities of the questions, this will definitely be a little bit more Dan's show than mine at this point. So I'm unmuting those right now. Give me just a second, and I'll check and see if any questions came in. One more. Any questions came in on the chat? Okay, everyone's unmuted. Feel free to ask any questions about data conversions. We've been seeing a lot with Amicus and Abacus going to Clio or other solutions because, as we know, Amicus has sunset Credenza. They've changed their licensing structure. Firms are seeing costs go up, and firms are just looking to be more mobile, and the cloud's a great solution to do that, and Clio's been a strong partner for us. But we will certainly convert any data to any system that works for the firm. We don't want to pitch a one-size-fits-all solution. We really want to tailor that solution to the firm.
All right. Well, with that, this is Dan. I just want to chime in a little bit and say, I think keeping in mind the what, why, and how is a very, very important thing, and I think John did a very good job of explaining, how that all ties in and why it's valuable to ask yourself those questions, both as the consultant role or the firm looking for data migration services. Continually challenge your ideas with those 3 questions. I think they're going to lead to a much smoother process while migrating the data.
So one question that came in is, what is the average amount of time for a conversion from end to end? And I'll throw that one to Dan, being our expert here.
There's quite a bit of variance that comes in with that. Obviously, the size of the scope and the magnitude of the records that are transitioning from one system to another will play into effect. With your small to mid-sized firms, when you're at, say, 20 users or less, the amount of data and the records that you transmit across, it seems to be, within about a 2-week turnaround. And that's from the initial scoping call, where we discuss what, why, and how. Then we'll develop a document explaining and, demonstrating all the mappings. We'll work with the clients, get the approval, and then actually perform the migration. So from end to end, from a small to mid-sized firm, you're probably looking at about 2 weeks or so. And the good majority of that, what we focus on is the consulting portion.
Thank you. So I'm going to leave the floor open to questions, but I wanted to go over one last point here. So move our slide here. So we do have a landing page there at the bottom, www.excelis.com/GoClio. Like I said, we've been seeing with the amicus changes and the amicus abacus changes, we've been seeing a lot of firms and a lot of interest in Clio generated independently, which is kind of the genesis for this meeting, or webinar rather. So we have some information there. We can do a scope for our, is it small firm, Dan?
Yes.
We have a flat rate for a scope from small firm to Clio because we've done so many of them. But we have, we can convert anything to anything if you need it. So go to that go to that page, check us out, ask questions. If you have clients that are interested in this, please share them. Oh, I think I saw another question come in.
Real quick to that end as well, on that web page that we have listed there, the excelis.com/GoClio. On that page, we've also taken the liberty to release one of our scoping documents, specifically the amicus small firm to Clio. That's a really handy tool to take a look at, that particular mapping document, as it will, show a lot of what the concept behind mapping the old system and where the data fields are into the new system. It's something I highly recommend you take a look at and kind of visualize what it is that we've been talking about today.
All right, well, if there are no more questions, feel free to get going. We'll hang out for another couple of minutes in case there are, or you can send the questions in through the chat, but everyone should be unmuted. Thank you for attending and have a great day.